Welcome back to another Rhize demo video. Okay, so you may have heard Rhize refer to itself as a headless MES. Now, besides sounding cool, what does that actually mean? Well, basically, when you take the world's best manufacturing data model, that's ISA 95, and combine it with a high-performance database and rules engine, what you get is a powerful backend to ingest manufacturing data from a variety of systems and program custom manufacturing execution applications. And on top of this backend, you can build any front end that you please to present and interact with the data. Today, I'm going to show you some rapid prototypes of manufacturing front ends. Our use case is the electronic batch record, and I'm going to show you two examples. First, I'll do some classic server-side rendering, then render the data with some basic HTML templates and CSS. Then I'll show you something a little more interactive, a batch report explorer built on AppSmith, which is an open source low-code platform. Now, for a quick background, Rhize is particularly good at eBRs. It integrates data into a standard model, so you only need to query one place, and since that data is exposed through GraphQL, you only need to query one time, even for a huge, detailed report. We've already got another video on building that query. Alright, so now let me go ahead and show you the examples. For the first example, I've used GoText templates to build out an HTML report from a JSON response. Here's an example of a report for a single batch. This batch has an ID. It is the part of the process segment material prep. You can see I have got the description here. We also have a little callout that informs us about some alert events associated with this job, but we'll get back to those in a second. First, let's look at the overview. Here we can compare planned and actual work. Compare the order ID with the ID, the master versus the directive, the scheduled start versus the real, and so on. We could add a lot of data here. For example, comparing material requirements and material actually used, maybe you could use a little formula to highlight any discrepancies. In this paragraph, I've added some context about where this job response sits in the wider work response and scheduling. Then we get to the resource drill downs. Let's select the one for material. This reports all material that was involved. Here I have two items of material, consumed and produced. This material lot is the ID of the material. It's got the material definition, that's sugar, part of the class sweeteners, and then we have some information about the material produced. We have similar cards for equipment and personnel, so these are the people and the equipment that were used in part of the job. And finally, we have a little exception report. This tells me about that alert event that was at the top. Okay, so that was an example of a batch report for one job, but just as an example of how you might want to group multiple, I've also built this page that presents them in a list. I've used this little emoji to indicate alerts that have exceptions, so I expect this will have an exception. Let's go ahead and select it, and yes it does. I can also search for a particular job. Hopefully this one's a little different. This one's about a different process segment, mixing. It'll have a different work master and different duration. Looks like it got different material, and good, we have more material items. So this one's going to have 4 items. We've produced 12,000 pounds of nuclear green juice, and to do that we have consumed 200 pounds of sugar, 20 pounds of this green coloring with this lot ID, and 20 pounds of this flavoring. Alright, then again we've got equipment, maybe we've got personnel, no exceptions were reported for this. Cool. This was really just a basic HTML with an out-of-the-box CSS style sheet. However, this could be absolutely appropriate for certain use cases. For example, in pharmaceuticals, you might just want to document evidence of an entire batch, and you would do something similar to this, using some logic and some templating to turn the JSON payload into an HTML or PDF report. Surely a real pharmaceutical batch record is going to have a little more detail, but the structure could be very similar. Now for something a little more interactive, we've also made this front end using AppSmith. So AppSmith is an integration with GraphQL, so we can just connect it directly with the Rhize API. And so then here we go, we've made an interactive batch explorer. So select a batch and get some information. The data is the same, but this presentation is more interactive and perhaps more visually interesting. So I've used this exclamation point to report on exceptions. So this has one spill on the floor exception. And then we also have the material consumed and used. Let's look at some other exceptions. Okay, here's a bad pour. Looks like we got to get a little bit more careful when we're prepping. So anyways, this is an example of 2 batch records. Again, you are really the master of your front end here. You can build exactly the front end that you want to make. And the final thing that I should mention is that each of these front ends took only a few hours to build, and I am far from a front end expert. So thank you for watching.